This video covers the basic operation of the sergers, or overlock machines, that we have in the costume studio. We have 2 home sergers and 1 industrial serger. The unique qualities of the industrial serger are covered in the final section of this video. I'm going to explain the Bernina L450 model. We also own a Burnett 234, which has slight variations, but is essentially the same as this machine. So the question is, what does a serger do? Well, it finishes the raw edges of the seam allowances so they don't fray. If you didn't own a serger, you would use a zigzag stitch on the regular sewing machine to go over the edges to keep them from fraying. A serger is also used to construct knit garments. If you look at knit clothing, you will most likely see serged seams. And most knit clothing is constructed in this manner because not only does the serging finish the raw edges, but because of the nature of the stitch also allows the garment to stretch, which knit fabric has to do. For this class, however, you will only be concerned with finishing raw edges so they don't fray. Let's go over parts of the machine. You will see as we go that there are many similarities between a serger and a regular sewing machine, as well as some very important differences. The serger has a foot control, just like a regular sewing machine, which sits on the floor. The pressure on the foot pedal regulates the sewing speed. On the right side of the machine is the power switch, and the on position will also turn on the light. Above the power switch is the hand wheel, which you will rarely, if ever, use. If you do use it, it must always be turned towards you. On the back and top of the machine are the thread stands and guides. And here's where the serger is very different from a sewing machine. There are 4 separate threads, and each goes through its own set of guides up here and down again and through the tension wheels. You can see each thread cone has its own tension wheel. I've opened up the machine so I can show you the complexity of this. 2 threads continue down here, and they end up going through the loopers. There's an upper looper and a lower looper, and 2 threads continue through their guides and end up going through these 2 needles. So you'll see there are 2 needles on this machine, whereas on a regular sewing machine there is usually only 1. Now, because of the complexity of threading this machine, we leave it permanently threaded, so it will be ready to go for you. You do not have to worry about threading this. It will be already done. The machine uses 2, 3, or 4 threads depending on the stitch chosen. For your purposes, you should have either 3 or 4 threads on the machine, and if you don't see 3 or 4 threads, please let Jamie or myself know and we will set it up correctly for you. On the sewing table is the presser foot, which is lifted and lowered by a lever in the back, which is right here. And below the presser foot are the feed dogs, which feed the fabric through the machine. Before the fabric is sewn, it is trimmed by a knife to make the edge even before it is serged. And the knife is just to the right of the foot here. And you want to make sure that your fingers don't get close to it. It's very sharp. After the fabric is trimmed, the trimmings drop into the bin at the front of the machine, which is this bin right here. When you serge, it's usually not necessary to lift the presser foot. The feed dogs start in front of the foot, so if you butt the fabric up against the bottom of the presser foot, it should feed through just fine. If you prefer, you can lift the presser foot using the lever. Just make sure the fabric is still in front of the knife and you lower the presser foot gently. Now I'm going to line up the fabric so a little bit is cut off by the blade. I want a nice clean edge for the serger stitches. So I'm lining it up there. I'm putting it underneath the foot a bit so the feed dogs grab it when I start. And you don't need to push or pull the fabric, you just simply guide it through, and a medium speed is best. So here we go, I'm lining it up and I'm going to push on the foot pedal. Okay, now don't go too slowly as it can result in a wobbly edge, plus there might not be enough force or momentum for the needles to go through the fabric, especially if there are several layers. You can always stop, lift the presser foot lever, and reposition the fabric. If you find you're going to the right or going to the left, you can always reposition if you need to. When you reach the end of the piece of fabric, you're going to pull on it gently to produce about a 6-inch chain stitch or tail. And you want to cut this tail so there's enough to tuck into the serging when you're finished. You also want to leave a bit of tail on the machine, because if the tail is too short on the machine, it may get caught under the foot when you start your next piece. So let me go to the end of this and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I have finished my piece, but I was pulling on it gently once the piece was out from under the foot to create a chain, and I'm going to cut it about in the middle. That will give me enough chain to tuck back into these stitches and enough chain on the machine so it doesn't get all tangled up and go underneath the foot when I start my next piece. Okay, so now what I want to do is finish this tail by tucking it back into the stitching that has just been created. So what I like to use is this blunt-ended needle. It's not sharp on the end like normal needles are. It's blunt-ended. It has a great big eye, so I can get all 4 of these threads through it. So I'm going to thread those through a little bit. And then I'm going to feed the needle through these stitches. And when it's blunt ended like that, you can really slide that easily. And then I will just pull that tail through, and it's all safe and tucked inside. And then there's still some sticking out, so I will just cut off that excess. And that will help keep the end of that tail from unraveling. If it were just hanging off the end, it's going to start to unravel and get really messy. So I like to tuck them in. There are other ways to deal with that as well, but this method I like a lot. So that's what I'm going to recommend that you do to finish off the end. Now remember that everything to the right of the blade will be cut off, and it's always good to trim at least a little bit of fabric so the edge is clean and the stitching won't hang off the edge. Now here's an example of me putting a piece of fabric through the serger, but I didn't cut anything off. The fabric was very much to the left of the blade, so nothing was cut off. And you can see how some of these looper stitches are hanging off the edge of the fabric. You don't want that because that does not create a very good edge, and things can get caught in this, and it's just not a good way to do a serged edge. By the same token, you don't want to cut off too much or something else could happen. Now I did sew a seam in this fabric like you will be doing on some of your projects. I sewed a seam on the regular sewing machine, and then I had seam allowances in here, and I wanted to serge them off. So I did that to serge and keep these edges of the seam allowances from unraveling. But I purposely, just to show you, put one of the seam allowances way over to the right, so the blade cut off a lot of fabric, and the width of this stitch, which is about a 1/4 inch wide, went so far over to the left that it basically overlapped my sewn seam. So you can see here how I'm seeing the serging, and it went past what I sewed on the sewing machine. So you want to be careful you don't cut off too much. You just have to keep in mind what the blade will cut off plus the width of the serger stitch, so that doesn't happen to you. So cut off a little bit and not too much. And you can practice, obviously, before you do your real project so you're comfortable with that distance. So What if you are serging a tube? You've sewn something together and it is a complete circle and there is no obvious beginning or end point as to where you start and finish. Well, just pick a spot. It doesn't really matter. You're going to pick a place to start and you're going to gradually move the fabric towards the blade and it'll start cutting. And then when you get back to the start of the serging, you're going to move the fabric away from the blade and run it off as normal. So let me show you. I'm also serging with the seam allowances with the inside of the piece facing me as opposed to the nice outside. So I can see these seam allowances approaching, and so they don't get folded over accidentally and caught up in the serging. I want them to remain open. So I'm going to start just a little ways in back of them. So I'm angling the fabric this way. Now this is a case where I will probably lift up the foot with the lever just so I can get this in here a little bit to start it. So I'm lifting that up and kind of placing it very close to the blade. And actually, let me reposition that a little so I'm a little farther from those seams. Okay. So as you'll see, I'm going to go around the entire piece. I'm going to gradually get on to where the blade is going to cut off a little bit of this. And then I'll go all the way around and I'll show you how I finish it. So, okay, here we go. So once I can cut off a little bit, I'm just going to straighten everything out. Make sure these seam allowances stay flat. And make sure, very important, that nothing is caught underneath, that you don't want to be caught underneath, or you will have a serging issue. Okay, so just go around. I stop every now and then just to make sure there's nothing, like the other side of this is not getting caught under the foot, that I've only got one layer that I'm serging here and everything's all safe. And just continue around. I'm trying to cut off the same amount all the way around. Okay, now I'm approaching where I started. So I'm going to go all the way down to here and then I'm going to run it off by angling the fabric again. And I'll be cutting this tail, and that's fine because it will help secure it. So I'm going to let the blade go just past here. And then I'm just going to angle it and run it off a little bit. And there's my chain stitch, which I can tuck in. I stopped a little bit short, as you can see, but I will end up tucking this chain stitch into these stitches to secure it. So once you get really good at this, which obviously I am not, you'll have kind of a smooth transition here and you won't have a bump. So you can work on that. I think if you do your bag project, this is exactly the kind of thing you'll have to do, is go in a circle around the top of the bag. This is the industrial serger that we have in the costume studio, and it is quite powerful. It is the type of serger that is used in mass production, hundreds, thousands of garments per day, or any fabric item that is constructed. You'll see this kind of serger doing that kind of work, and it's very powerful. It's very expensive. It will last a long time, and we usually have it threaded with black thread. So if you would like black thread to serge with, this is the machine for you. So it is very much like the home sergers. It does the same thing. It's the same concept exactly, except the controls are a little different. So I'm just going to quickly walk you through the little bit of differences on this machine. First of all, there is there are on and off buttons, and when you press the on button, you'll hear the motor getting up to speed pretty quickly. So I'll press that for you so you can hear that. It also turns on the light. Okay, so it's now up to speed, and this light that it also controls is movable, so you can move it down here close to your work, or you can move it up here, or you can move it out of your way entirely if you're seeing low enough. So that is how you turn on the machine, and then obviously there is a red button that turns it off, and please turn it off when you're done with it because it's kind of noisy. So the way you control the machine are through 2 foot pedals. One is on the right side, it's kind of shaped like a foot, and so this operates the presser foot. I'm going to press down on that, and you can see the presser foot going up and down. And the lever to the left is what makes the machine go. Again, you can regulate the speed by how much you press on the pedal. Okay? Those are really the only big differences between this machine and the home machines outside of the power. You can go very slow, you can go very fast, and everything in between. So I'm going to do a little section on sewing, on serging just a straight piece of fabric to show you how this works. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick serge along one edge of this muslin to show you how it works, and I'm going to feed it in the same way that I do in the other machines, except on this machine I do like to use the foot pedal to lift the presser foot to get my fabric underneath a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, lift it up, and I'm just going to put it in a little bit, again making sure it's in front of the blade so it doesn't get in the middle of the blade and the blade doesn't start cutting awkwardly. So I'm just going to put it under the foot a little bit, make sure I've positioned it so I'm cutting off a little bit. So I'm just going to put my foot on the foot pedal, and I'll do this long edge of this piece of fabric for you. Here we go. Now you can see just how slowly you can go, and hold on to your hats, I'm going to go fast. So you can go very fast, but I wouldn't recommend it, but just to let you know what the range of that machine is as far as speed. Again, I'm leaving a tail, and I'll cut it off. So I've got enough to tuck in and finish this edge off nicely. But there you go, there's a serged edge done on this industrial machine.